Welcome to the 65th episode of the Interview Series. The Interview Series is a production of One Week Critique, an Iowa-based arts and education nonprofit that offers educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. You can learn more about us and our programs or support our work by visiting our website, oneweekcritique.com. And please like and subscribe to help us continue producing valuable content. I'm Matthew Schmidt, joined today by Dylan Loring. Dylan Loring is a poet from Des Moines, Iowa, and an assistant professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, Barron County. His poems have appeared in New Ohio Review, Jubilat, Ninth Letter, The Laurel Review, and Forklift, Ohio. Along with his friends Kate McLeod and Jordan Devereaux, he edits Lost Pilots. This Smile is Starting to Hurt is Dylan's first book of poems. Welcome, Dylan.
Thanks for having me, Schmidt.
Hey, anytime. It's always good to have a fellow Iowan on the program.
Isn't that true? Hey, I'm going to be pretty obsessed with providing valuable content now that I know that's a thing. So,
Yes, you have to. That's like requisite. All right, so today we're going to look at a poem called When She Came Over for the Second Time. Of course, from This Smile is Starting to Hurt. And that came out on Southeast Missouri State University Press this year, 2024. So, you told me that the early draft of this poem was written as a challenge to compose a poem with boxed wine and cube cheese, both in the poem. So, while those words appear in the poem, the physical objects aren't actually present, outside at least of the bikers' stomachs. So, what are the benefits and drawbacks of writing about the past and future in poems?
well, one benefit I can think of is, start the poem out with a change in progress, right? Got to see what's happened before in order to get a sense of where the character's going, perhaps. It's a good chance to kind of bring up some regret as well for the speaker. They're on a date and they ate poorly and drank poorly, and now they are paying the physical price of worrying that their partner will notice how, out of shape they are in this given moment.
Indeed. Yes. So, as far as when you say character, would you say your poems often have characters or a character in it? Are they kind of would you say they're story driven? Like how would you characterize your poems?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the poem, but I think all my speakers have some characteristics of myself to some extent. I am the one giving them a voice, right? Um, I kind of like to approach every poem without like maybe a preconceived speaker, where I'm just kind of giving the poem a voice as I go, because yeah, I like to add a little bit of variety.
Indeed. Variety, always fun. Um, so in order to get some words in the air, I'm going to ask you to read the first draft of your poem so they can know what these bikers are actually up to.
Right, they're probably in lots of suspense.
Probably so.
And just so you know, everyone, these are not motorcycle cool people. I wish they were, but
It would be nice if they were.
right, that makes any poem better. When she came over for the second time, she noticed a couple of old Schwinns along the back fence that had probably been there for 20 years. We rode along with few words and rusty squeals, the dust rubbing into our crotches on the left side of the has-been highway. We rode playfully fast, me trying to pretend that keeping up wasn't physically exhausting, trying to forget the boxed wine and cubed cheese, knees jabbing my stomach at each rotation of the bicycle's version of a clock, something that could be slowed down or sped up for a night like this. She made her bike look like a meticulously chosen movie prop, biking with no hands as she tied her hair back. And she noticed me staring at her, so she stuck her tongue out and squinted, crunching down her chin. So there we were, whipping by fields of soybeans and making stupid faces at each other, only to turn onto a gravel road where we whipped by corn stalks, making stupid faces at each other. And this kept going until one of our chains broke.
Excellent. Thank you. So, would it be fair to say that this date took place in Iowa?
This is more of an imagined date.
Oh, okay.
Um,
All right. All right.
but I will say though, some of the memories are kind of more from playing around on my grandparents' farm as a youth, like the finding old bikes in the machine shed, that kind of stuff. So, definitely a lot of Iowa in this poem.
For sure. So, I was going to ask some questions about humor because when I think of you, I think that you're a humorous writer. Um, Not that everything's like funny, haha, or something like that, but that there's whimsy, there's fancifulness, and so on involved in the poems. So I think that's a major component of your work. And so I was just curious, like, how did that become a serious focus, and when?
Yeah, so when I first started writing poems, I was in workshops as an undergrad at the University of Iowa. Um, Go Hawks, as we like to say, right, Matt?
That's right.
Matthew. And so a lot of just my early poems are trying to make my other friends laugh a little bit, trying to have fun with it. Um, and a lot of them would be kind of indulgent a little bit, just going for the joke at every chance, changing the tone of the poem to make a stupider joke, that sort of thing. But I've always been really interested in humor. It's kind of how I process the world as well. So, eventually I got a little bit better with it, hopefully, and am able to kind of rein myself in when I'm, just wanting to be like completely immature out of nowhere or like, I don't know, just tangential in a way that's not charming, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and when we were talking about discussing this poem for the interview, you had asked me if the poem was funny. And do you find nothing funny about this poem whatsoever?
I mean, I wouldn't call it an hysterical poem by any means. I mean, this image I crafted though of the squinting faces riding bikes on a date is kind of humorous, though, I will admit. Um, I think I was more just trying to get at that awkwardness, that kind of, you know, relationship when you have a close relationship, right? Where you are able to be silly with each other. You're able to kind of, not be perfect around each other, which I think is important following the speaker's kind of regret of the meal that makes him look even schlubbier than usual, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I think there's humor in the poem, but this is me trying to have heart and stuff, so I don't really think of the humor as much when I'm doing that. It's more just kind of like, it just kind of enters. It's all about the surprise, right? Like I want to write stuff that like keeps people interested. So I think that the humor is a way for me to try to do that.
Yeah. You know, who are your teachers at Iowa, if you don't mind me asking? Do you
Yeah,
remember
for
them?
sure. Yeah, I remember all of them. They're wonderful people. So my first one was Sarah Martin, who I think has a novel in verse project that she's currently working on. She was wonderful in that we kind of had similar taste in poetry. So I ran into a lot of James Tate, Michael Earl Craig, who is hysterical as well. Mary Ruefle, who I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I think Mary Ruefle's super funny. But her poems are so sad at the same time that I think it kind of, there's always like a joy behind the sadness though, which I think is super cool. Um, Chelsea Minnis, Mark Leidner, whom I think you studied under a little bit. Uh, my professors kind of saw that I was interested in humor and stuff, and so they kind of threw some recommendations at me. Christian Schlegel was a wonderful influence early on. Chris Martin, and there's like so many I can't even name them all. I was really lucky to I went into college with a lot of credits taken care of through AP classes and stuff. So I kind of took the slow 4-year path where I could kind of take some extra poetry and workshop classes, even though I didn't technically need them to like finish a degree, that sort of thing. So I used that kind of opportunity to study under a bunch of cool writers workshop people. And yeah, Dean Young is a huge influence on my work. Dobby Gibson. Heather Crystal is one of my current favorites. So I like the kind of weird, strange, playful um, poetry for the most part. I read everything, but that's what I gravitate toward.
Yeah, yeah. No, Mark Leitner was one of my early instructors at Iowa, and I thought one of the best things about studying under because I took several classes as well with different writers, and I thought the best thing that happened was just the sheer variety of stuff they would bring in to any given workshop. Because usually they'd be like, at least when I was there, they'd be photocopying poems from like all these different places. And they put together a packet, and you'd have to go pick up the packet. Back in the day when paper rained. And
Is the cubby hole still a thing? That's what I'm wanting to know.
yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know.
It was brilliant. It was a brilliant system. I think they came
Yes.
under some scrutiny for that a couple years ago when some people were perhaps taking a look at some poems that were not supposed to be looked at by them. They weren't in the
Ah,
class or whatever. And yeah. Anyway, I heard a little bit of gossip about that, but it was a cool system in my opinion.
yeah. I don't know. I just like I found some of the old stuff from those days because I just moved again. And so I've been looking through it and being like, oh man, I totally forgot about like this whole thing. I can't like I don't have anything right off the top of my head, but like just going back to them, I see that, I'm missing that element of like I don't know where the next thing's coming from sort of scenario because I don't know, maybe we've been doing this too long or something like that. But but like in those days it was like everything was new. And so yeah, I think working with someone like Leidner, who is a funny poet as well, is really nice because you just kind of get the sense that as long as you're using things for a reason, you can kind of do anything.
Yes. I think that he makes poems that appeal to non-poets and poets alike. There is kind of a nothing's out of boundsness to his poetry that I find exciting too.
I think he could probably just publish his Twitter account, and it would be a book. Like just it wouldn't necessarily all be poetry, but it would all be good.
No, he takes some interesting photographs too.
Yes. So to get back to your poem after that long
Did we
foray.
though? No.
So in When She Came Over for the Second Time, the sentences get increasingly longer as we move throughout the poem. First, it's a two-line sentence, then three, then eight, then 11, before a couple of short sentences that end the poem. Can you just talk a little bit about pacing in your work?
Yeah, for sure. Since I do a lot of voice-driven stuff, I feel like pacing is super, super important. It's probably important all the time to every poet to some extent, but I think that it's especially true when you're writing a chatty or a voicey poem. So yeah, there's kind of starts out a little fast paced with those longer lines. Um, then we have kind of a longer sentence. It kind of, I feel like for this one, it kind of speeds up and slows down, right? Kind of like the image in the middle of it. It's a little stop and starty. Um, and I think like part of that was intended to kind of like reflect the messiness of relationships. Like that might be too artsy of a statement to say though. Maybe I just like, just did it and it happened. That's the cool thing about being a writer, right? Like
Yeah.
the reader assumes everything's intentional. They'll come away with something a lot more than what you were really trying to do, probably.
No doubt. I mean, it's like hidden gems that you didn't know were hidden, right?
Yeah, like thinking sometimes I write something and I'm like, that's not funny. And then like it's the thing that gets a laugh. And I'm like, what?
Right.
Seen what makes you clap. What's that, Rick and Morty?
Yes.
Oh, don't boo at me. I've seen what's made you clap. I've seen those things.
Would you say that pacing directly interacts with tone?
Yes, very much so. Um, with something as delicate as tone, it doesn't take much to like shift the tone. It doesn't take much to kind of evolve it. And that's stuff that I'm super interested in my work. Um, but yeah, it totally makes a huge difference in my opinion.
So you had mentioned that the hardest part about this particular poem through the drafting stage was coming up with an ending that felt like it worked. Um, so what kind of difficulties did you go through? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I mean, I just, wrote the first draft, was not thrilled with the ending by any means, felt like a placeholder. What did I have for that one? I had, one sec. There it is. Um, so we had the soybeans line and making stupid faces at each other, only to turn onto a gravel road where we whipped by corn stalks, making stupid faces at each other. And this kept going until one of our chains broke. I don't know, it just seemed like too much of an I'm trying to get out of the poem ending in that one. And then I thought that the cornstalk repetition, I thought I could play that one a little smoother as well. So, it's a poem I took a lot of advice on. I was in my MFA program at the time, got a lot of good advice from my thesis advisor, Richard Terrell, and my peers. And I played around with this poem a little bit more a couple years later. I think it was published in Voice Lux Journal. Thanks to John Compton for that in 2020. Yeah. So I spent a couple years away from this poem and then I came back to it and I revisited that ending. I'm like, God, this feels like one where if I don't need an A plus ending for this poem, I don't think. I don't know if I can do an A plus ending for this poem. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm selling myself short or something, but it needed to be better. It was not a passing ending, right? So I tried to go a little bit more abrupt with a shift at the end in the 2020 version. So I'll just go ahead and read that ending. Um, so I'll start with whipping by fields of soybeans again. So there we were, whipping by fields of soybeans, making stupid faces at each other, only to turn onto a gravel road where it was fields of corn, but the same stupid faces. And don't try to tell me you would have felt that the crash coming in that pit you call a heart. So that one is a little out of left field, and that was kind of what I was going for, but I felt that it was just a little too quick of an ending for the poem, a little too abrupt of a shift. The speaker is all of a sudden like super angsty, and it felt like it kind of came out of the blue. Um, the pit you call a heart thing felt a little cliched. Couldn't tell if I was, pushing beyond that or not. So wasn't happy with that ending either. And then it came time to revise the book, which was its own kind of beast, right? And so I'm like, yeah, if this poem's going to make the book, it has to have a better ending than this. I don't care if it's like a B out of A plus ending. It just needs to be better than failing. So, I revisited it right before the book came out, probably, well, the manuscript was accepted in 2023, I think. So I was probably messing with this ending around then. Um, and so the new ending looks something like, there you go. You have it pulled up so I don't have to, of
That's
course.
right.
So there we were, whipping by fields of soybeans, making stupid faces at each other, only to turn onto a gravel road where it was fields of corn, but the same stupid faces. And don't try to tell me you would have felt the crash coming. Don't dare reduce us by pointing toward our off-page ending. And so this is kind of a interesting move in my opinion, or at least I thought it was fascinating. I'm basically end rhyming those three lines in that last tercet, which you'd think would be a really aggressive, like sing-songy kind of thing, but I think that they're just words that fit well together in that context, so it doesn't feel as aggressively sing-songy, which I kind of like. Um, but yeah, I wanted to kind of spread that ending out a little bit because I thought the second ending, of the middle poem version was a little too abrupt. Um, and so, yeah, I thought that phrased things a little bit better while giving the same kind of vibe to the ending.
Well, and it's also more open-ended, right? It doesn't say how it ends. It just says that it will end. And like any relationship, right, has a chance at ending, but they all end a little bit differently. Even if it's like,
Yeah, I mean, they all end one way or another
yeah,
eventually, right?
yeah, right. Even if it's like, the usual kind.
Yeah.
Uh,
My grandparents turn 94 in a couple weeks.
oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're waiting as long as possible for theirs to end. I love it.
that's right. Well, hanging on, right?
Yeah,
uh,
no, I think that's a really cool point you bring up too, right? For the speaker, it's more about like, hey, this bubble is going to be burst at some point, one way or another, right? Even if the relationship works out, it's going to get messy at some point to some extent because there's humans involved. A little bit of the end of the poem is just that speaker pushing back, like, ah, God, this like good memory is, or this good imagined experience, whatever you want to call it, um, it's not going to last.
right, right. Well, it also, I think, calls back to the
But is that
persona.
necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not
No,
necessarily a
no.
bad thing that it doesn't last.
I think it calls back to the persona that runs throughout the book. Maybe you could give like a little preview to people about persona in the book who haven't read it yet.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a series of poems in the book. I want to say there's four of them, in which a persona is mentioned in the title. So all four of them kind of share the same speaker. And they kind of they're pretty self-deprecating, right? They're kind of like looking at yourself in the worst light possible kind of thing. And they're a little bit rabble rousing, I suppose. I kind of like this idea of kind of an aggressive brand of poetry at times. So yeah, there's one of them I like a lot because it has a Taco Bell fourth meal reference. And that's all a poem really needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking like the rabble rousing bit, like where the end of the final version is open ended, but you also start thinking like, well, the persona could have taken this farther, but chose not to for a reason. So like it allows the reader to be like, all right, so what's the persona doing here, and kind of tracking it throughout the book because
Yeah, and I mean, even if I don't think of my speakers as necessarily the same from poem to poem, I mean, they're similar enough to where, yeah, that through line is definitely there. And yeah, I think that one of the things I appreciate about my own work, not to toot my own horn, is that I do kind of end poems in various different ways. So I feel as though uh, I'm constantly trying to kind of subvert ending expectations, and then sometimes I don't in the book, and it's like, what? What's this?
yes. Well, I mean, but it's true though. Like, isn't ending the second hardest thing or the hardest thing? Uh, either it's the beginning or the ending, right? Like you got to start somewhere.
Oh
You
man, but
gotta,
sometimes the middles are the worst.
I know, but
Sometimes you have
like,
a good idea and you know how to end it, but it's like, I can't get to A from A to B here. Maybe
true,
later.
true. I guess here's the other thing is like, depending on how long the poem is, like the middle can take up pages and pages of a single poem. So it's like, all right, so does the middle make up like 80% of the poem? And then the beginning's 10 and the end's 10? Like, where does that fit?
Right, 80%, that's a lot, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
and,
lot.
and then of course, like the middle is where the magazine readers give up, right? So like there's extra pressure on the middle. At the midway of a poem, if it's longer than like, 12 lines, all of a sudden the editor seems to be looking for a way out to some extent, even if they won't admit it.
Yep. Yep. Well, long poems are hard, right? I mean, short poems are hard, long poems are hard. It's just hard in different ways, really.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean that's art for you, right? Like the challenges change constantly.
True. Yeah. So I like to think of humor as sometimes like kicking a dead horse, um, because sometimes it's not funny at first, but if you keep at it, it becomes funny. Um, and I think that is true with your stupid faces in this particular poem, right? So my question is the repetition necessary for the speaker slash persona in the poem, or is that the mundanity of life combined with social norms and uncertainty that steer your lines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First, I want to just address the dead horse in the room. We are Iowans, but that does not necessarily mean that we kick dead horses.
Very true.
We've
Yes.
probably had the opportunity before, but we just chose not to because we're good.
Right.
Um,
Figure of speech.
definitely. Um, so yeah, whipping by fields of soybeans, making stupid faces at each other. Let me just think about that ending just a little bit. Can you pull it up for me, please,
Of
again?
course.
All right. Um, yeah, I mean there's just that repetition in life that I'm trying to point out, right? Like there's always kind of a staleness or maybe like a desire to hurry things along or to slow things down, when you're in a relationship with someone else. So I think part of that is just showing, the two are spending more time with each other in a way, right? Um, and I think that the repetition was also intended to be kind of like show that they're kind of stuck, right? Because it's kind of a haunting thing if you like take away the funny of it, like it's kind of like, well, who are these weirdos? Why are they doing that, right?
Right.
So, so I think I was trying for more of a haunting thing there in addition to the humor. And I think part of my agenda is that, some people, they think Iowa, they think of corn, but we're also soybeans, right?
Lots of
So I
soybeans.
wanted to give a little bit of a history lesson there as well.
Yeah. Uh, our two main crops, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's tall, sometimes it's very short. You just never know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, and sometimes isn't the funniest thing the most horrifying thing? Like that's
Oh,
that's
100%. I mean, and I think that one of the things that my book kind of concerns itself with, like a kind of a through line throughout, is this idea that sincerity and irony are like so tethered together. Like, especially in this modern age, right? Like sometimes it's like you're cracking a joke or something, and it's like, but wait, there's some truth here. Or like you're not cracking a joke, but it's like, this is fucking hysterical. So you're gonna have to bleep that one probably, but uh,
nah.
oh, good. Very cool.
No, we're an adult program here.
Very cool.
Um,
Sorry for wearing so many layers.
uh, see, there you go. Yeah, so
And I think humor for me also can like, I think it's kind of an anxiety response in a way too. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and so I'm always overthinking things. And I think that that process of overthinking like allows me to kind of see just how comical I am, even though like things are serious, right? Like when you're overthinking something, it like actually causes you distress, but at the same time, it's like I'm literally just wasting my time for no reason, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, also humor relaxes us, right? Like if you don't find your own life funny, it's hard to, you know, go through your life. It's harder to go through your life, I should say.
Yeah,
I feel
reading's always been an escape for me. It's always been something that gives me great joy and pleasure. In writing, I want to have joy too. If I'm having fun writing, I think there's a pretty good chance my reader might too, reading it.
definitely, yeah. Um, so let's talk about the title of this poem. Uh, the title asks the reader to insert a romantic interest as the she in the title. So my question is, what would specificity do to the poem?
Huh. Um, I kind of do this move a lot in my poetry where I try not to like necessarily yeah, I want the reader to be able to kind of bring their own experience to the poem. I know that might sound kind of like, it might be something that a workshop instructor would roll their eyes at, right? But I think there is a place for the universal and a place for people to insert their own experiences. Of course, you have to be specific in other ways, right, in order for the poem to actually hit certain emotions. But I think in general, I like want my readers to feel welcome in my poem. Some of them are more like second person pronouns as well. Sometimes I write in the third person, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think sometimes it's nice for the reader to be able to kind of insert their own situation into there to some extent, and then other times uh, you want to not do that.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think it's a fine line, honestly. I feel like I do it as well a lot too, and it's always questioning yourself of like, all right, why second, why third instead of first person? Um, and it does depend on what you're doing throughout the poem as well. But it's one of those decisions that I think if you don't write like first person or third person like constantly, that you have to make more often. If I don't. I'm not saying that it's like harder to do one and just do one or like do two or three. I just think people write differently, and you have to pay attention to when you do things differently. Why did you go there in the first place?
Well, and I'm sure our novelist friends will tell us that, they've all written a novel or something draft that was in the wrong point of view, right? Where, you know, it's a point of view that could work, right? But it just doesn't suit the material as well as a different point of view. So, um, I think in general, it's nice to not like feel too comfortable or too kind of reliant on your kind of past tendencies. It's nice to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, I don't need to do something this way just because I've done it in other poems or because that's something I've been interested in lately. Maybe this poem needs something different. So I think it's always nice when we kind of question anything we do kind of automatically when it comes to our creative writing.
Definitely, yeah. Keeps the mind working instead of just staying in one position at all times. So my final question has to do with humor slash jokes, and that is there a point at which humor or a joke can go too far? And by that, I don't mean by being offensive.
Right.
We're going to kind of take that out of this equation here, but does the humor fade if the joke hasn't ended earlier? Like, I guess what I'm saying is, when do you know to let up on the humor, or to make a move, change the tone, change the feeling?
Yeah, for sure. I think humor can definitely go too far in this sense, right? Something might be funny initially, but then if you beat a dead horse like our Nebraska neighbors would, um, you know, it the reader's just like, oh, come on, right? Or like, oh, that's cheesy, or like, why is he doing this? Come on. But then if you push it like three steps further than that, it could be way funnier, possibly. So it's always nice for me when, I'm in a situation where it's like, is this humor landing? Is it not? Try to pare back and also try to expand the heck out of it, see if I can get it to be funny again or funnier. But yeah, it just kind of depends on the individual poem. A lot of times when I'm revising, I'll realize like, oh, maybe I had two or three lines in a row that were kind of on this same train of thought that started out with a joke. And, maybe they're just a little distracting at this point in the poem. Maybe I should just pare that down. One thing that's always kind of stuck in my mind, and Chris Martin told me this in his class, and I'm not sure if, I'm sure he got it from somewhere else, and I'm sure I'm not quoting correctly. But basically, you do something once in a poem, it's intentional. Do something twice in a poem, it's not. Do something three times in a poem, it's intentional. So I think that kind of concept could be applied to humor, right? Like you do it once, Cool. You do it twice. Is that a mistake? Is that really taking things further? Are we hijacking the poem? And then you get to that third time, and all of a sudden you have a pattern, right?
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite comics, Norm Macdonald, where
Oh gosh, he's so funny.
where it seems like he'll show up at a talk show or what with or whatever, and they'll feed him some material, and it's like he just showed up. He hasn't thought about anything, and he just comes up with a concept. And instead of like dropping it because he thinks it's no good, even if it is no good, he will just ride that concept the entire interview and makes it funny because of that.
Right, it becomes performance art in a way, right?
Yeah.
I like to always think about writing as kind of entertaining or kind of a performance. So, um, yeah, I think that that's really cool. Um, Gosh, what did that just remind me of? It reminded me of something. Yeah, he's just super funny. R.I.P.
Indeed. Well, if you'd like to see some performance art, pick up Dylan's book, This Smile is Starting to Hurt. I think now it's coming out from Black Lawrence Press. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were really cool, and they took distribution rights after Southeast Missouri State University Press had to unfortunately close down. So, yeah, it's only been out for a little bit less than a year. Check it out if you want to. You can definitely yell at me if you don't like it.
All right. Well, thanks, Dylan, for being on the program. We appreciate it.
Sounds good. I'm going to clear all the dead horses out of my office.
All right. Thank you.